Hey everyone, Andrew here, and it's time for another series review. This time I decided to take a look at a series that most people know the first book in the series, and then I don't think a lot of people actually read the rest of the series. Or at least not as many as has read the first book, because the first book is a classic that if I go through my entire life and I think about every time I've seen somebody reading a book, the majority of the time it was this book. It's a highly loved book with a series that most people probably have skipped. But I kind of felt like talking about it and the way the series went, and so today I will be looking at the Giver Quartet. This includes the four books, which are The Giver, Gathering Blue, The Messenger, and Sun. And this is a series that's kind of a series in name only, in that they barely tie into each other. It's really kind of, they're all their own individual stories that just kind of take place in the same kind of universe. It's a really unique and bizarre kind of quartet. And I'm going to start with The Giver, which majority of you probably have already read in some way or seen the movie or something. And believe me, I will be talking about the movie because I have my opinions on it. But I'm just going to go quickly over the plot of The Giver, which is pretty simple. So we have this boy named Jonas, who lives in this perfect society where everyone is balanced and controlled and everyone is happy. They don't have any negative experiences. They don't have any super positive experience. They are all kind of just living in this black and white, simple, easy existence. So Jonas turns 12 at the start of the story, and on the 12th year of their birth, children are basically taken to a ceremony where they are given their positions and their jobs and roles in society from then on, and then go and start apprenticing under that. Jonas is given the role of the receiver, which he'd never heard of, had no idea what it was, and they send him out to this small house on the outside of town, and there he meets the gentleman who reveals himself to be the titular giver. He is an older gentleman with all of the memories of a past society that no longer exists, of a world that no longer exists. Basically, this entire society takes place in a post-apocalyptic future, and he has all the memories from our time and backwards. And he is getting to the point where he can no longer do his job, which is to guide and advise and teach the council what they should do and not do and how this affects them. So he is to pass this on to Jonas and thus give Jonas all of these memories of the past. As Jonas is receiving these memories, he is experiencing emotions and sensations and things that he has never dealt with and having to understand it and come to terms with it, but also realize how beautiful and amazing the world can be and how dark and depressing. It's this combination of like super positive emotions with super bad emotions, but feeling them together is important. And the fact that he's the only person in the entire village that can feel any of this is making him miserable and having such a difficult time dealing with it. During all this, Jonas's father has brought home a baby from his work at the hospitals. This baby is constantly crying, has been very fussy, and they're not certain if they will ever be able to get him to a point that they can give him to a family. They may have to send him to the beyond. And Jonas eventually figures out that that means they are going to kill the baby. And Jonas can't stomach that, cannot accept the idea of having to do that. So one of the nights he steals the baby, rides off into the distance, and ends up in a snowstorm. And the book is kind of vague here, because a couple different people have said different things with it. One is the idea that Jonas has died, and he sees this light, and this is him going to heaven. Others say it's this other sort of symbolic thing. But considering there are more books in the series, and Jonas appears in them, I'm going to take it at face value, which is Jonas escapes the city and survives with the baby. With the society in this special cocoon thing, as Jonas leaves, all of the memories that he has in him are going to spread to the rest of the society, most likely leading to the society destroying itself. And that's how book 1 ends, with this kind of question mark of, did they survive? Did they not? Will we get answers? We'll find out. If I'm just looking at this first book is amazing. This book is absolutely deserving of all the awards it has. And the praise and the fact that people read it all the time, it deserves it. It is an amazingly well-written book. It is super easy to read. It is only like 115 pages. You can breeze through it in a day, less than if you're a fast reader. It's well told, got lots of emotions, lots of quality. It's just so descriptive and so interesting. And then we get to like the movie version of it. And I feel that the movie is the best adaptation of this that we could do. Because this, to me, follows under the same kind of lines that Wrinkle in Time did, where this book is so much about how you perceive it, how you internalize the information, how you translate and go through the book itself in your own body and your own physicality, that it literally cannot be translated one-to-one to a film. Because so much of it is about the language and you reading it and you getting your wrap around it that you can't translate it to film. That said, this film did its utmost to actually convey the right emotions, the right feeling, the stuff that it did its darndest to actually try and capture that. And unlike both Wrinkle in Times, this actually came pretty close to, I think, being a good adaptation. It's pretty close. Because you get the whole experience. You spend the first part of the movie with it being black and white. And then as he's receiving these things and he's starting to understand things, you slowly get color to start to trickle into this universe. And then through images and emotions and score and the way it's done, you start to feel the things that Jonas is feeling. You're starting to get those connections. And it's very well done. The cast is very good. The only real negative I found with this book that I accept of the adaptation is the fact that it tries to be a little bit like Hunger Games. Which, yeah, no, that's a flaw. It's definitely nothing like Hunger Games. It should not be treated as such. That said, the book itself is rather short and a little simplistic, and you do have to add things to pad out the running time, otherwise this would be a half-hour movie. So, adding more stuff, adding a little bit of the dangers and the different effect things, and having a little bit more of the society trying to control them, all that was just them trying to add a little more substance to the product. It's not bad, but it does weaken the product a little. Doesn't help that it was made by the same studios as Hunger Games. And they were just doing that with everything. That's the reason Allegiant looks like that. That's the reason every single movie since Hunger Games that's teen post-apocalyptic type of thing is literally just aping Hunger Games, and it's sad. Because most of the books are nothing like that. But anyway. I honestly, I don't get the hate for the movie, other than people that love the book being mad that it's not a one-to-one adaptation. But it's the thing of you're not going to get that. It's not possible. I'm sorry. The book is always going to be the preferred thing because it's a book. And it's a book that is well written and uses lots of good language and good wording that allows your brain to expand and to think about things and so much more. You can't translate that into film. Not really. Not with a kid's book that is this simple. Maybe with a weird art house indie film that's all about drugs, but not with this. And yeah, this is it's just one of those things where I was like, this might be one of those movies that just could never be adapted well. But I really like it. I honestly think it should be given a second look from people. It's got some stuff in it that works really well. The acting's good. The story is pretty good. The use of visual effects and the way it's done is really good. Honestly, it's underrated, and I think deserves a little bit more love. Anyway, let's move on to the second book, which is Gathering Blue, which is the second book pretty much in title only. It has almost nothing to do with the original book. In fact, it has like 0.00001% to do with the original book. It's such a minuscule part that I would dare say this was a book that was originally written as its own standalone piece, and then they decided to tie it into The Giver after. And I could tell right away this was completely different than The Giver because of the way it's written. This one is a dramatically more difficult read. The Giver was accessible. It was very easy to read. It was very easy. You can see why this appeals to so many people because it's so simple and easy to read, but it has such value to it and such strength to it. Whereas this one felt like I was reading Old English. It just was so jarring and so hard to wrap my brain around that it made it a little harder to really even get into. I was ready to stop reading after page 2. The Gathering Blue is the story of Kira. And Kira lives in this small, really small, podunk little village that everyone is poor except for the leaders who are the council. And it's a village that is very harsh and very controlling and does not like any damages or weaknesses in their people. And if someone is born that way, they take them out to the woods and leave them to die. Kira was supposed to have this happen to her, but because she was born defective and one of her legs is numb and doesn't work, but Kira's mom refused and wouldn't let them do that and raised Kira. But at the start of the book, Kira's mother has just passed away, and Kira's holding vigil for it. Meanwhile, the villagers are trying to take Kira's space and get rid of all of her stuff, and they're planning to turn it into a pen for the toddlers. And Kira comes back and is, angry and screaming, "This is my stuff, what are you doing?" And they're like, "You go live in the woods and like you're supposed to. You should have been put there long ago." AKA, go die. Go away and die. We don't care, you. Kira is enraged and crying and screaming, and the council shows up and takes Kira away, and they decide that they're going to take Kira into their society, into their homing, and raise her because she has abilities. Kira has this ability to have this special way of weaving things that embeds emotions and feelings into it, and they want her to repair the ceremonial robes for the singer so that they can do this big ceremony. And Kira meets the two other young people that are living in this basically the mansion house, beautiful, rich thing, the only thing that's of any real money or value there. And one is a young boy who has the special ability of wood carving and embed emotions into that. And the other one is a young child who has a power of singing and can elicit emotions and different feelings from his voice. As you get to know these people and you get to figure out what's going on, you realize that the council is using these three kids to manipulate the villagers into being obedient and following what they say and doing what they want. She has this friend on the outside who is a young boy who is named Matt, and he's basically one of like 8 kids, and nobody cares about him, and he's just kind of left to his own devices. He and Kira hang out, and he joins her while she goes and gathers the ingredients to repair the robe, to do the ceremony. And along the way, she meets this blind man who turns out to be her father, who disappeared many years ago, and he'd been left for dead and then rescued by another village. And he's come here to take Kira with him and to take her to his new village. And Kira refuses. She knows what the council's doing. She wants to try and stop them and wants to use her gifts and her friends' gifts to change the scenario and make this village better. She does tell her father to take Matt and take him to the village and raise him. And the father agrees and leaves, and they perform the ceremony, and Kira and the other two kids are like, okay, we're going to change this, we're going to do everything, we're going to make this a better town for all of our people. And then the book ends. And it's like, is that it? Are we not going to get to have the... Really? At least in the sequel, are they going to deal with... No, it just ends. And we never really get a conclusion to this. Yeah. No. Unfortunately for me, this is the weakest of the four. It's a rough read. It's hard to get into the language the way it's written. There's not really much of a plot. It's not super compelling, so I'm not inclined to read it. I do like the way it's descriptive and the way it talks about weaving, gathering colors, and doing these different things. It's actually really interesting. And then it's also just a super abrupt ending. So it's like just as the plot starts to get going, as you start to get invested, the book's done. And it's just like, that's it. And then it also has nothing to do with The Giver. Like, at all. So if I was comparing it as just as a sequel to The Giver, it fails, because there's nothing about it that's The Giver. If I was comparing this as a book on its own, it's okay. It's got some stuff in it that worked really well. It's got some stuff in it that doesn't. It has good qualities, but it just doesn't really ever get going. Then we move on to book 3, which is The Messenger. This book is all about Matt, the young boy who is Kira's friend, who's now living with her father in the other village. He's now going by the name Matty and has reached the teenager age. So he's getting to the point where he's ready to start doing work and wanting to get a job, and he desperately wants to be a messenger, who is someone who runs between towns delivering mail and news. And he's a very fast runner, and he also has this special, somewhat healing ability. While Matty's having his desires and all this, one of his friends is having trouble with their father, and their father has been acting insane and doing these strange things, and has randomly married this woman who's just became a widow, and it should still be mourning her husband, but has gone and got married. And we find out that there is a new trader that keeps coming to the village, and he has been offering to grant any wish provided they can provide payment. And that Maddie's friend's father had done this to get the woman, and now everyone was doing these kinds of trades and these kinds of wish granting. But as they were doing it, they're starting to grow angry and resentful and paranoid and causing lots of trouble. Maddie goes to the leader of the village to try to get some advice to figure out what they should do and what should be going on. We meet the leader of the village, and it's Jonas. Apparently he survived the ending of The Giver and is now running this town. Basically tells Maddie that he needs to travel to his former home as a messenger and bring back Kira, because she is needed in this village, and that her time at the other village is coming to an end. Maddie agrees, takes off into the woods, but the woods are becoming darker and more dangerous and more lethal. Manages to make it all the way to Kira, who has been waiting for him, and it's like, it's time now. I can feel something's different, something's going on, something's wrong, and agrees to go with Maddie to her father. So they're traveling through the woods, but they keep getting attacked by different things, and the woods are slowly starting to try to kill them. During all this, Jonas has figured out some of the stuff that's going on and is trying to meet up with them halfway, and ends up getting to the point where Maddie has to use his ability to try and save Kira and Jonas, and he ends up pumping all of his healing ability that he has into the earth around him and ends up healing everyone of every single thing that was happening because of the traitor. And the forest returns to normal, and Maddie's dead, and the story's over. And if that felt abrupt, that's because that's how the book did it. It was literally healing, Maddie's dead, the end. It was just... So, this one is a little bit easier to read. It's a little faster paced, a little more energetic. And it is nice to actually have it. It does tie in the first two books together and make them into some connection, as opposed to nothing, which the last book was. But it's a very abrupt book. The concepts are not the most fleshed out, and we're still kind of left with a cliffhanger thing because, okay, yes, you stopped this evil, but the traitor's still out there. He's still gonna... What's to keep him from just coming back to town and doing it all again? But the message of it is actually really interesting and kind of well told, and I do like this one. It's really well written. It's a much easier read than Gathering Blue was, but it's abrupt and doesn't really have much to do with anything. And then we move on to book 4, which is Sun. And this one feels more like the direct sequel to The Giver. Partially because it takes place in the town of the Giver before the fall, before Jonas leaves. So we are introduced to Claire, who is 14 years old. Basically, when she went through the ceremony of 12 and got her position, she was given the job of childbirther. So basically, she gets to live in a fancy, do-nothing life that has everything provided for her, but her entire existence is just to get knocked up and produce as many children as she can. And during the birth of her first child, something goes awry and she ends up having to get an emergency C-section, thus making it incapable of her to ever have children again. So she is no longer able to do the role, so she is removed and relocated into the farming warehouses to make food and get supplies from traders and do things of that nature. As she's doing this, she is slowly starting to develop feelings and emotions because she stopped taking meds. Because she hasn't been on meds, because you don't do that when you're pregnant. So the thing that had been keeping everyone else kind of controlled and in their emotions in check is not affecting her, and she's not taking them. So she's remembering that she has a child. She's feeling things about him, wants to see him, wants to be a part of his life. So she ends up going to the hospital and looking for him, and ends up finding him, and it's this very loud, crying baby that will not stop. And she's desperate to see him and desperate to be a part of his life, but knows that she cannot. Because in this society, when babies are born, they're given to parents. The person who gives birth to them is never supposed to ever see them again. But she is okay with that as long as she can stand on the sidelines and see his life and be a part of his life in any way she can, at least to watch him grow. During all this, the baby meets Jonas, and Jonas knows that they're going to try and get rid of the baby, so he takes the baby and leaves the village. And when Claire finds out about this, that her baby is gone and that Jonas has stolen her baby, she becomes distraught, and she runs off to the docking area, jumps aboard the cargo ship, and hides. And this is one of the things that drove me kind of nuts about this, is we were like this close to seeing what would happen to the village when Jonas leaves. And he hits that field and his memories spread out to all of them. Because that's, from the first book, that's the thing I really wanted to see and wanted to experience and wanted to know about, is how would this society deal with this flood of emotions? Because Claire and Jonas got all of these emotions slowly. It built up for them. They got to get used to both the positives and the negatives. Whereas from the sounds of it, when Jonas leaves, they're all going to get slammed with all of the emotions all at once. I really wanted to see what would happen with that. That would be a really interesting thing to do in a story. And we got so close to it. Just, ugh. But nope, she escapes before that happens, and we never get to see it, and never get really an explanation of what happens to the village. The closest thing we ever get to anything explanation is at one point Jonas talks about how a couple months after arriving in the village, a barge came down with all of the books from the giver's house, and that he took this as a sign of them telling him that everything was okay, that they had, everyone's all right. We've all come to accept the new world and the way things are. And I'm like, my brain instantly went, or they're super rebelling against all of these emotions and are trying to regain control, thus getting rid of every single thing that could elicit or invoke emotions or things that could cause people to think. I.e., so what are you going to get rid of if you don't want people to feel or think about things? Books. You're going to burn books. That's, get rid of them, keep people from having them or using them. The fact that isn't even kind of addressed, that could have been a possibility. It's like, no, everyone's fine. Everyone's good. I don't believe you. I do not. I honestly think the society probably completely imploded. But we never get it, so. Oh well. Anyway. So, we get to the second part of the book. So, during the shipment of the cargo, Claire ends up getting knocked overboard and washes ashore to this small fishing village that is basically surrounded by a giant cliff behind them and a very small inlet that they can't really get out of. So Claire has to come to terms with the fact that she's kind of stuck here because this cliff is so high that only one person has ever managed to climb it, and he fell off and basically became damaged, and one of his legs doesn't work. So Claire starts, trying to be part of the village. Has this one of the sons of the leader flirting with her, and she's enjoying her life, but she's remembering her child and desperately wants to see him and desperately needs to be a part of his life. So she ends up going to the gentleman who climbed the cliff and begs him to teach her because she needs to get out of here. She needs to go and find her son. He agrees, and they begin the arduous journey of teaching her how to climb. And any other book, this would have been like, and she's climbing the cliff. She falls a couple times, but now she knows how to do it. It's like, here, no. Multiple years, upwards of 8 years training to climb that cliff. Working out her leg muscles, working out her arm muscles, working out her stamina. It's like she spends every day training and working herself to get to the point that she can do this climb. And he warns her that when he actually did make the climb, he made it all the way to the top, and up on top was someone waiting for him, a person of dark intentions, and he offered him a deal. The climber refused, and the traitor kicked him off the cliff and sent him crashing down to the ground below. So Claire makes the climb and gets to the top of the cliff, and he is there. And she knows that she has to agree with him, or he will do the same thing to her that he did to the other one. So she agrees to the trade if she can get to see her son. And he sends her to this village where her son is. But she has aged dramatically. She went from being around 17, 18 to being nearly dead. So she ends up in the village with her son. And she spends the next 7 years watching him from a distance because she's an old woman and knows she can't claim to be his mother. During all this, Traitor has popped back up and has been causing some trouble, and is basically waiting for Claire to die without ever getting to tell her son the truth. And Claire ends up revealing herself to Jonas. Jonas tells her son who she is and what's going on, and our son knows that he has to go out and face the traitor, who turns out to be basically the devil, the embodiment of evil. But he has his own kind of gift, and he uses that to defeat the traitor, and Claire returns to her original age, and her son are reunited for the first time. Oh, also during all this, Jonas and Kira got married. It literally, the book doesn't even really touch on that. It's just like at one point Jonas is home and his wife is, and it's like, oh, and here's my wife Kira, and you're like, you guys got what? When? But yeah, so the fourth book is honestly my second favorite. It's got a lot of stuff to it that works really well. I like this is the one that actually really has a story and has an arc and doesn't end super abruptly, doesn't feel rushed. It has a really good structure to it. And I really like Claire. Claire's a really interesting character. And you sympathize with her and you understand. Also, something I didn't mention, this is the longest of the books. This last book is pretty much like the length of the first three books combined almost. It's 400 pages. So it's super long in comparison. But it has the most weight to it, the most character development. It has a lot of going on with it. Actually really liked this middle chapter of her trying to get by in the village and figure out who she is and where she can be, but also then having to do this extremely long training montage to get ready to climb. Like, the fact that it took years is just impressive to me. Any other show, any other story would just, she spends 6 months practicing and then she's able to climb out of this. And it's like, no, she took the legit amount of time it would take to train to climb a cliff that tall. She had to build up every muscle in her body to the absolute point, perfect build. The third act is kind of where this one falls a little bit apart. It's just the fact that she gets there, finds her son, and then proceeds to not be a part of his life and to not tell him for multiple years. Understandable, kind of, but it's also like, really? You couldn't find some way to be involved in your son's life a little more? And then it's like, yeah, and then defeating the evil was a little rushed, but much better than the last two books ended that way. So, yeah, when you get down to it, though, these four books are a series in pretty much name only. They deal with different concepts, different characters, different stories. The tones are not the same. The arcs are not the same. The world is barely the same. It's each of the villages is dramatically different than the other. Because you start off with the Givers, who's this perfect dystopian society that has all these advancements. You get Gathering Blue, which is the like living in stone huts type of people. You get the Village, which sounds like a medieval wood and nicely maintained village, and then you get the Fishing Village, which is trapped in this perpetual, unable to leave environment. It's just like none of these feel like they take place in even the same time frame, let alone the same world. That said, they do have running themes. You have the themes of emotions and taking in the good and the bad and having to find the balance, but also having to overcome evil and people taking good at things and trying to use them for bad reasons. There's some connection to it, and having read them all and looked at this, I can definitely say if you've read just The Giver and you have no desire to read it anymore, don't read it anymore. If but I would also say if you even consider reading anymore, I'd recommend reading them all, and I recommend reading them in order. Because Sun works so well if you've read the other three first. And it ties everything together pretty well. It gives a really nice conclusion. It gives a really good story. It's flawed, but I still think it has a lot of good qualities to it. I ended up buying the whole series after I read them, because they were good. I enjoy them. I overall the series is probably a 4.5 for me. Individually, book The Giver is a 5 out of 5. The Gathering Blow is a 2.5. The Messenger is a 3.5, and then The Sun is a 4.5. But it's still like it's got some stuff in it that works really well. It's got some stuff that doesn't. It's one of those ones where you don't have to read them all if you don't want to. You can stop reading them at any point and don't have to ever come back to them if you don't want to. That said, I highly recommend Giver, and I definitely would say it's worth a look to read them all if you have any interest. I enjoyed them. I like them. I also do recommend giving the movie another shot. Give it another look-see. Just, I mean, I know you're going to compare it to the book no matter what. Just, it's never going to live up to it. Just be okay with that. Just see if it's good on its own. And that's pretty much all I have to say on that one. See you all again soon. Happy reading, y'all.